So, just building that strong green and all those for everyone. I like that green team face. A long time ago, in the depths of history, there was a government that crown and you came up with policy for material it is one life from that. I still remember some of it. So I may bring that back into the room. I kind of also work part-time in the building centre, construction sector challenge, looking at how we can build issues that are entertainable. We may well this hotel. So SERA, as you know, we've got in socialist societies, so SERA is or anything around sustainable just transition. Please look at our website, simply joining. So we've been going through over 40 years, has always helped Labour understand some of the challenges around these issues. Sometimes that's technical, but sometimes, perhaps more important at the moment, it's about how we bring people with us on a transition that is not voluntary. So actually engaging people, helping them understand the choices of place. Some of that is individual personal family, but clearly lots of it is our business industry do its job to give us a just transition that is net zero. So with that in mind, it's great to be hosting a session like Amesbury with Smart TV. This is an event, but also not just our housing trends, but people who have houses. And then finally, our CPOs of the government of the country, that how we still practice policy. So in second, Brian is going to start with a sort of perspective from that small business federation of some of these we've got. I'm going to ask you to speak for maybe 5 minutes. And then I'll go through all of our speeches. We have got one presentation, so I think you can see the slide presentation behind you shortly. And then please start thinking about your questions. It's always good to have 1 or 2 people ready, so when they're finished, I can go. And because I know this 5 of you, that probably means it's you 5 who will get asked the first question. So if you think we know me or I know you,
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to actually speak this afternoon about actually our homes and what we do. And just to let you know what the Federation of Master Builders does, we are a trade body. 15% of our members build homes, but they are the small micro house builders, typically only building about 5 to 6 homes a year, so they're not the volume house builders. And the remainder of our membership is very much involved in repair, maintenance, and improvement of our existing building stock. So they are the typical building company that you find in your village, in your town, in your city, employing a few people, and they are the backbone of the building industry. Sometimes they get overlooked by the larger contractors. So it is actually very much the UK's builders all across the country. So we have a fantastic housing stock in this country, but it's very diverse and much of it is very old. 1/3 of the housing stock predates 1919, and that presents only problems that many people, unfortunately, are living in very leaky, cold, inefficient homes. And that is not going to be acceptable now or in the years ahead, particularly we've got given that climate emergency. Now, the UK, as you know, has got a legal obligation to cut carbon emissions to 0 by 2050. Our existing homes contribute 20% of carbon emissions. So, although the emphasis has been very much about new build, unless we tackle our existing building stock, we are not actually going to deliver our 0 carbon target. And there are good reasons about tackling our existing homes for a variety of reasons. One of them is, of course, it would actually create much needed jobs in the building industry. And the benefit of retrofit is that those jobs would be in every community across the country. Homes are everywhere, and that means actually the work would be everywhere in terms of retrofitting our existing housing stock. A retrofitted home also improves the health of people of this country. We know that actually many people suffer poor health because of the conditions in which they live. And we've estimated actually that if our 29 million homes were to be retrofitted, it could save the NHS £1.4 billion over the next 4 years. And at a time when we're hearing about energy bills going up, a retrofitted home could actually save a family, on average, about £436 a year. So that's a very welcome financial incentive at a time when a lot of families are struggling in this country. But why aren't we doing it? Why aren't we actually tackling our 29 million homes? Why aren't we building a green Britain? And I put to you that's a lack of political leadership. We've seen piecemeal approaches. We've seen the Green Homes Grant scheme last year introduced, taken away. Earlier than that, we saw the Green Deal introduced, taken away. So what we're getting is a stop-start, dip in, dip out, playing around with builders, playing around with our housing stock, not treating our existing homes as an infrastructure priority as it should be. Now, I'm pleased actually the FMB, working through the Construction Leadership Council, has developed a national retrofit strategy. This is the 20-year plan to actually upgrade all our homes and to make sure that they are energy efficient. And we recognise the scale of the challenge. It does require political leadership from the government and cross-party consensus about actually fixing homes. What we want is long-term thinking, but the first step has to be to understand what can be done in each home. Each home is separate. We hear about street by street, but actually each home is separate unless you've got social housing. But each home should have a building passport so that the homeowner knows what can be done to actually improve their home. We actually need to create a retrofit market itself, so there need to be financial incentives to actually kickstart the retrofit market. And we need to be looking at things, grants for people on low incomes, we need to look at stamp duty reform, we need to look at reduction in VAT. And then, of course, we need the skills, we need to make sure we've got the installers, enough installers who are properly qualified and trained to do the work. So that also requires a massive challenge. And we know, having talked to Tony Perkins, about actually the need to upskill. So that's my plea, a national retrofit strategy to upgrade our existing homes, and we're hoping we'll come on like new homes, we need diversification in the supply of new homes. 12% all new homes built by local builders, and that was 40% in the late 1980s. So I hope we touch on that as well. Sorry.
So it's essentially some good context there, which I'm sure you may mention to second. And if somebody at the back could signal to me that they can see the presentation as well. Yes. Yes. Here's Zoe at the back. Hear me, I can see people with their thumbs up.
Can you hear me now? I'll try and shut it. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. I'm Zoe Watson, a sustainability specialist at Leather Bernstein. Leather Bernstein are an architecture firm that specialise in housing. We do a lot of passive housing, so chunky, grey, ultra-low energy housing at the minute. And we also work closely with local authorities and housing associations. As buildings and construction currently contribute approximately 38% to global greenhouse gas emissions, it's clear that a significant reduction must be made across the sector and fast. Fortunately, in recent years, experts in our industry have been able to define what good net zero homes look like and the targets required for achieving this in practice. Whilst decarbonising our homes poses many challenges, it also provides a big opportunity. We can improve the efficiency of our homes to reduce fuel poverty. We can raise the quality and construction standards to deliver homes that are less prone to overheating and damp. And we can create jobs and upskill within our sector. As an industry, we already know how to do this. It's now time to get on with it. I also want to mention, as well as part of the Architects Steering Group, I'm also a volunteer as part of the London Energy Transformation Initiative. who are a group of over 1,000 professionals who come together to define what good looks like. And this is us at the LETI Climate Emergency Design Guideline, which provides a pathway towards net zero. So I'll describe it now. So how does LETI define good? Essentially, it's quite simple. At building scale, we need to balance the equation. So the operational energy that the building uses needs to be reduced. And that needs to be reduced to a point where we can offset that with on-site renewables, ideally, or where we can't, investment in off-site renewables. As a UK, we're tipping the balance, we're not doing that. So we need to both invest in improving energy efficiency and also supplying more renewables. This is the pathway that LETI proposed. We want to meet our targets, and 100% of new buildings will need to be net zero by 2030. That means that by 2025, 100% of all buildings need to be designed to net zero. So that only gives us about 3 years period. So these are the 3 targets that I'd like you to kind of bear in mind. Essentially, they're linked to energy and not carbon. So they can be measured in their carbon. The first one is the space heating demand, which is we are level efficiency. The second is energy use intensity, so the total energy use of the building needs to be reduced, and an net-zero balance, as I mentioned. There are 3 ingredients to achieving this, quite simple ingredients. The first one is ultra-low energy fabrics, according to textile standards, repair-type construction, and good fabric efficiency. Second is using a low carbon heat source, so a heat pump. And the third one is solar panels to our rooms. So quite simple. Let's improve in that. A couple many people have met these operational targets. 30,000 homes at the master plan level and 2,500 homes at pre-construction. But let's not forget that the full life cycle of the building needs to be considered, not just the operation of the building, the full process of extracting materials, transporting, constructing, and then the demolition all have a big carbon count. So we need to also try and reduce this. And the best way to do this is to not to demolish buildings in the first place, to retrofit our existing stock. So I'd just like to end on 5 policy recommendations to put the UK on track to 1.5 degrees. The first one is to ban all new fossil fuel developments. The second one is ensure all new buildings meet the LETI net zero operational targets, ideally by 2030. Third one is ensure all buildings measure whole life all buildings expected to stay in use. And the final one is to incentivise retrofit and refurbishments by reducing VAT in line with new build. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to ask Rob from Smart Energy GB to talk about smart meters and key roles in this transition.
Thank you very much. So I'm from Smart Energy GB. We're the national campaign for smart meters rollout. We've been doing that for about 8 years now. I suppose the first thing I'd say, I probably won't find out a huge amount about smart meters because you've all got smart meters. The challenge for us from now on is to do more of those. We've done easy stuff when it comes to net zero. It's relatively easy to build lots of offshore wind farms. It's much, much harder to get a minimal intelligence in this country to net zero standard. And we've made it incredibly hard for ourselves. We've not had stable funding, policy markets like human and grant, which meant that the supply chain hasn't had time to scale up, and consumers are not focused on long-term skills that we need, and we've not had, in this country, aside from our campaign on smart meters, a significant consumer engagement campaign for the British public, helping them to understand what they need to do to get to net zero. So, and that's better, frankly, because it's left us in a place where homes are as warm as they should be, people aren't as comfortable as they should be, bills aren't as low as they should be, and we are high when it comes to net zero. And we're currently in a situation where gas prices are down 250%, And the damage that would do, particularly to fuel poor households across the country, is genuinely shocking. And that could have been significantly mitigated were homes, had the foreign policies that you set out been enacted earlier and were homes actually firmly efficient. And it's going to cost potentially rise over this winter, but we really haven't done more of this. But like that, people can participate in net zero, and that is where smart meters can come in, because people can see their energy use in real time, but then they can start doing things like, if they've got an electric car, they will be able to sell energy back to the grid if they've got a vehicle for a charger. And they can be partners. If they've got micro-generation on site, their home becomes a mini power station. They can maybe on a peer-to-peer basis sell energy to their neighbours. We create this world where the consumer is genuinely a part of something. They get much cheaper bills as a result. They're providing a service for our electricity system, and that means we can decarbonise it faster. And this is where we go. And then we also get a high-skilled engineering workforce. We've heard talk of building back better, of levelling up in all these kind of cultural slogans. Well, actually, what that really looks like is thousands and thousands of places retrofit and engineering jobs that we can create. Starting with the smart grid rollout, which is almost 3,000, but then looking at things like installed heat pumps, electric vehicle chargers, micro-generation, and thermal efficiency across the house. And we need that system to be much more resilient, so we need to use electricity when it's good for the system, and that's where we can use smart meters to use that electric vehicle to essentially battery on wheels, charge it up overnight rather than during peak hours. So we sell energy back to the grid during that peak period, which provides service to the electricity system, but the household benefits too. This is the kind of future plans where we've got skills, we've got better homes, healthier homes. But women are always play their role in that field. Part of that is around communication. We need a high quality communication campaign, and that's about getting the framing right. We can't talk about carbon footprints in net zero, we have to get the emotional motivation right. But actually, on top of that, the real issue is about ability to pay, ability to work for your home, getting the triggers right so you touch people at the right time, so we can do it. So we need to get bring down the upfront cost of things like heat pumps. Now, Octopus Energy and others are talking about half the price that next year, so I have confidence that will happen as markets scale up. We've already seen the batteries and solar panels, how that price is being reduced. We need to do that across the whole set of technologies. We need to get supply chains right. We can't live in a kind of boom and bust world where policy can go when it comes to energy efficiency. We need to look at vulnerability in particular. Now, actually, our research has shown that vulnerable people are less inclined to get the kind of technology we need, and it's about if we can sort out the logistics of it and help reassure the ones that are more difficult, they will take these measures up actually as fast, if not faster than the rest of us. And the other issue to really nail policy on is on the kind of household you're in. If you are quite renter, you are fine. Puts the whole raft of policies at zero. The smart is an example, but of course it works. Make sure we can find a way to try to do this where the landlord doesn't have the power to doing so. So we've got a lot of work to do to get the barriers removed, to do brilliant communications to the public comments. But if we do that, we can get net zero, we can bring down energy bills, and we can have healthier housing stock. So I'm optimistic, but I'm sort of baffled and sad by what we're trying to say today.
Thank you, Rob. Before I invite Mike and Yemi to give their Labour perspectives, I just want to put a question to you. I thought I would have stolen Mike's thunder by saying, who's going to smart meter? I'm not even going to do that now. But I do want to ask you to think about why you haven't got one. I don't know what your answer will be, but I may ask you before we finish. One of the key transitions that we might be going through in housing is from a passive small P, not a registered trademark sort of thing, which is a receiver of energy, and that's all it is, to something that is a dynamic part of the system. It will happen because if you have an EV, you will get a better deal if your EV can share its energy back to the grid. It will happen because if you have an Octopus with other solid use tariffs there are others available, you will get a better deal. If, like me, you follow many people on Twitter, some of them are telling me that they are getting credit for some of the information they're on because of the nature of the Taiwanese tariff and the nature of the suppliers. Those things are all sort of moves in direction. But if most people don't get a smart meter, the systems themselves will probably be to build more kits. And in building more kits, there will be higher bills for everybody. That's where it relates. And maybe all of us can afford an extra So do you have a think about why you don't have smart meters? There are reasonable and legitimate reasons. And if you've got to fix one of those, then please talk to us because his team and a wider supply system needs to get better at answering those questions. And sooner or later, most people need to work out how they're going to use one, not the other. So please do think about that. I hope that won't be a distraction from listening to my because front bench view or where we are with that is more than where you will have to get some.
And thanks to the Labour Environmental Campaign Group and sponsors and for supporting us and for everybody coming as well.
So I asked if it's possible to speak up a bit.
Yes. In May 2009, our Parliament declared a climate emergency. We're still not 2 years on from that now. So where are we in terms of the housing sector, in terms of the response for action? As Brian said, we've got some of the leakiest homes in Europe. So 19 million to 29 million homes. Carbon emissions account for 14%. Households, it's 40%. So concerted focus, driven by the good people down to be in this room, and very importantly by the government, is needed. Governments across the globe. In response, this current government, with as much fanfare as their levelling up agenda, launched the Green Grants Initiative, a number of initiatives, rightly pointed out, to drive forward the retrofit agenda. The Green Grants has been pointed out by the panel. I think it lasted barely 6 months before being scrapped. Boris Johnson giveth £1.5 billion, and Boris Johnson taketh away, I think, £1.25 billion, unspent on that vital project. A flagship programme that was embarrassingly scrapped as we're seemingly providing leadership this week to the COP26 event conference in Glasgow. I mean, don't get me wrong, obviously it was a welcome scheme in principle, but the administration was botched from the government's obsession with outsourcing. And its failure was laid very bare, and I know a number in this room would have read it, by the Damon Audit Commission report. It's not the Labour Party saying that, it's the Audit Commission. The only positive part of that scheme, the only successful part of that scheme, is where local authorities and combined authorities have led the way, getting that money out of the door to those communities most in need. Meanwhile, just 2% of new homes, think of that, 2% of new homes are future to respond to this urgent journey we're talking about as we march towards that target, net zero target in 2050. As I speak, there are literally hundreds of thousands of homes being built don't have to be retrofitted. Homes that cost us to people, to the environment, future taxpayers, not just, I pointed out, our health and care systems. In 2015, to scrap the Labour government's carbon zero standard, which I know some people have been involved and we worked on incredibly hard to achieve. have real political consequences. Since that was scrapped, 800,000 homes have been built. Weaker homes have been built since. And you just think about the sheer scale of it. So, what's the label? Is then outlined in a speech, and Rachel, the Shadow Chancellor, who wants to be the Green Chancellor ever, reaffirmed. So it's time to evolve, to think bigger. We need a bipartisan Green New Deal to respond at pace to the climate emergency. Public, third and private sectors need leadership, and this has been echoed from everybody in terms of the panel. The direction has been lacking forever, drifting dates and initiatives. Think of the Future Home Standard. And think about that financial frame that's needed to make up that funding mix for the transition to green homes. People unsure, people can't plan. The transition must be a just one, very important to those targeted those most in need. Climate justice and economic justice must leave nobody behind. Whether it's by the to access that green economy, the new insulators, hydrogen boiler fixers, heat source engineers, and construction workers. Building our workforce, and again, it's certainly something that the FNB is championing. And the supply chain is vital. It's great. Green homes are very important in green communities. The retrofitting programme, part of our proposed £28 billion will have a clear vibrancy, and think of success again those COVID grants happening, the business support grants. Local authorities were there, place-based initiatives, and that's how we succeed. Our investment bank will turbo work in partnership with local authorities, to make that funding. In the immediate future, as a partner, together with the housing sector, will hold the wood's feet to the fire. Challenge them in Parliament to front load the social sector initiative, the £3.8 billion that we promised in their manifesto 2019. We'll push them to develop a new scheme and strategy, but involving all stakeholders in the sector, the FD, for example, and local authorities process of 2050 reforms that strengthen the community voice and bring permitted development back into the fold. Speed things up and resource local planning authorities to help small buildings, which is something we spoke about before. To conclude, ultimately it's our goal, of course, to be the party of government with a bold, new Green Deal as we march rapidly towards net zero in 2050. Thank you.
And then I want to head over to my executive member, Leanne, to give us a London perspective. Leanne?
Thanks very much, Hugh. Of course, the disadvantage of going on to four other experts is what is there left to say. But I just want to emphasise the issue of urgency. And I think we've laid out very clearly that there is an issue about, anything that's being built new now has to comply with all the zero carbon requirements. And I think it's absolutely disgraceful that the Code for Sustainable Homes was scrapped. We've actually gone backwards from where we were after that was scrapped, because we were starting to build properties that comply with the higher levels of the code. But when we also look at existing properties, we've also got, we need to look at, who are we talking about? And they're probably actually, because of the Labour government's decent homes programme, not the social homes, social rented homes are probably not those in the worst state. The private rented sector, we have to really address how do we persuade landlords to address issues for their tenants. And of course, given the way that property prices, they seem to miraculously still be rising, unconnected to anything else as far as I can see, are putting home ownership out of a lot of people's reach. The percentage of people, particularly in London, I'm sure this is the same elsewhere, the number of people who are actually homeowners now has declined. So we really need to focus in on the private rental sector. It's very unfair for tenants to be left in disgraceful circumstances. But also there are those people who have been on property value and own their homes, sometimes now debt free. So they're asset rich but cash poor, and they're living in a very leaky Victorian or Edwardian solid wood property. They may have already put in the long insulation, but to actually make that a cosy home at a price they can afford is maybe it might be beyond them. So we need to be looking across all sectors. But I think we also need to focus in on the other work that is in the title of today. I've got fed up with doing that better. I've gone off for 3 words, so it's some chap called Johnson keeps using them, get aggressive, but it says green and warm cold and straw. And so one of the things I think we need to remember is it's not just about carbon, it's not just about energy. We need to be building homes that are also going to be lighter in terms of the amount of water that we're using, because we are using up the water in aquifers, we are very wasteful with water, it's actually very cheap, we don't build homes that use water effectively, and of course it's actually very expensive to heat. Waste. The way we deal with waste coming out of our homes, the way the entire waste hierarchy still needs a huge amount of attention. Biodiversity around our homes, around the homes that we're building. When we're retrofitting existing homes, we need to be building in better biodiversity. And when we are building new, we have to start using fossil fuel powered vehicles to get there. So we need to be addressing all of those issues. In urban centres, we have to be addressing the issue not just of cold, and making sure that homes are warm and can be affordably heated, but we also need to be addressing the issue of cooling and the urban heat island effect, which is actually, I think, is some of the homes that we'll be putting up these huge glass buildings. I think that's going to be a massive problem. So I don't want to repeat what other people have said. We need a national infrastructure project for our existing buildings. That's got to be partly coming through with 0% VAT on retrofit. It's insane that we're still being pushed towards new build with the VAT arrangements. We need to make sure that all new roads are built to the highest possible standards, and it has to not just be energy across all of those other areas. And if I was going to commend some documents, the actually existing documents that we now have in London, it takes a long time to consult over the spatial development strategy for London, also known as the London Plan. Consultation started in 2016, it went on for a couple of years, then unfortunately the draft plan intended to publish fell onto the desk of one Robert Jenrick. Now what happened to him? I think we remember some sleazy guy called Richard Desmond. Mentioning about making sure that the buildings and also retrofit is if there's any plan, try and get the best, the highest quality stuff in there, and it's all on the london.gov.uk website. Just go and have a look at the documents there. The environment strategy, the housing strategy, the London plan all sit together. I'll just say one last thing. Don't forget to think about if you are in government in your local area, working with cooperatives. I think the Federation of think small, think, and behaviour change is essential. Smart meters don't work. Actually, air source heat pumps also are pretty hard. If you don't
tell people how to use them. You can't just flick people over into a new future and create a cosy home without engaging with them about a new way of living their life. So there are some behaviour changes that people need to undertake, and we need to support people towards that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lily. So thank you to our speakers. We've got about a good half an hour to take questions and observations. I would like to take them in threes. I would like to ask whoever's going to put the question to stand up and say who they are or where they might be from. There's a whole array of propositions in there. I think, in a sense, the observation I would aggregate from what I've heard is we do actually know mostly how to do this. It's not a question of how to do it, it's how are we going to do it and deploy it. And part of the challenge then is, some people say that aviation and shipping are difficult. Housing is much more difficult because there are individual, personal, life, family choices in every one of these 30 million choices. Aviation, there's only 5 or 6 companies that make planes. There's only so many airfields and airports, and so much, in a sense, aviation law that you need to address. How do we help all those people move forward? I've seen at least 3 hands, 4, 5. Oh, that's just good, right? Okay. If I start with you, and then you, sir. If you'd like to stand, say who you are, and either where you're from or what you're from, to suit.
Hello there. I'm a councillor in the London Borough of Hackney, and I've got a work background in the construction trades. Is that okay?
Yeah, and your name?
Claire.
Claire.
Sorry.
Claire.
I've got a question, perhaps to all of you, but particularly to the Federation of Master Builders. Sorry, I forgot your name. Obviously, a lot of this, it's great to hear what you're saying and the direction of travel, but all of this relies on this 400,000 jobs that we've talked about. I know in some of the schemes that I've seen throughout the past 20 years of both study and work, that some of the energy efficient schemes haven't quite gone to plan, because often there's not been a connection with different trades doing stuff. There's not enough of a holistic approach. We haven't got enough, people do not want to go into the construction industry. The construction industry in general has been denigrated, apprenticeships, etc., during the last 30, 40 years, different approaches of different governments. You look at Northern Europe, where there's a sea How do you think we can get people, wanting to do these trade skills, but also what can we do to increase the quality of trade qualifications to address the skills gap?
Thank you very much. The gentleman over in this corner here, and then the gentleman with the jacket on the back. I'll take those 3, and then I'll start with Rob. Take all or as little as you feel appropriate, and we'll come that way. And take another 3. I've seen already 3 or 4 down here. So yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Andy Crane. I'm from Wokingham CLP, and I was a councillor until May. So I think my question is probably for Leonie. You mentioned that the planning inspector, I think, or rather the local plan. So in our local authority, we have a local plan. As part of the local plan, there will be a building design guide, and we see that as a very effective way of pushing the highest possible standards. And the pushback we've had from officers is that the big house builders in our local authority is the big house builders, so they're doing 600 or 700 houses a year. The house builders will appeal against planning decisions which are refused on the basis of a very high standard. Ultimately, that will go to the planning inspectorate, and inspectors will uphold those appeals. So I guess my question is, what can we do in the short term and once we're in government to circumvent that? I appreciate if the legislation backs up our plan, then that should be okay, but I'm just wondering about this gap between the legislation informing sort of zero carbon building and local authority, local plans not being supported by the inspectorate. Thank you.
Very much. Gentleman at the back, if you'd like to say who you are.
Hello, Councillor Vincent Stopps. I chair Hackney's Planning Committee. Concrete is a huge producer of carbon. Last week I was at a topping out ceremony of a 6-storey timber building, engineered timber. In Hackney we have the largest timber structures in the world, and they are newly built flats. We have 11 stories, and 9 stories, and 10-storey, 200 flat blocks. The combustibility of cross-laminated timber and other timber structures has been questioned by the regulations, and to some degree the building of these buildings has been kiboshed by Mr. Jenrick, who was mentioned earlier, and latterly by Mayor Khan. I'd like any contributions to this debate as to why we are dismissing one of the best renewable structural building materials known to man without a by your leave. And I'd like to invite any of you guys on the front bench there, front panel, to come and have a look at the largest timber buildings in the world, because they're only a short ride from here. There are 24 of them, and seriously, building in concrete and steel is so old hat, I really would implore you to take my offer up.
Thank you. We'll make sure we get your details, because there may well be people in the audience who like to come and see them as much as people on the panel. So Rob, maybe you want to pick up some of the elements of certainly that trade and how we get people into things, but anything else you want to say, then Terry will come this way.
Yeah, I think I'm only skills on the skills and trades one. One of the things I've sort of seen with the thousands of smart meter installers is they are hugely skilled engineers, and we do need to do more to celebrate that. And what I find is really interesting about the smart meter rollout, the biggest challenge with smart meter rollout is the telecommunications element of it, getting the message to go from the meter to the energy supplier. So what we've got, whether it comes to solar panels, which require telecommunications between the inverter and the panels, smart meters or anything else, is all of our engineers that we need for net zero are going to be telecommunications engineers, they're going to be digital engineers, and they're going to be physical engineers, as well as brilliant drivers, people there. So these are hugely skilled, high-value jobs, and we do. I can only say I really just sympathise with the question, because we absolutely need to find a way to land that point, because they are fabulous jobs. They're very well-paid jobs on the whole, and we need 10 to 100,000 more people doing them.
Thank you, Rob. Terry?
Yeah, I'd like to respond on the final question on concrete. I agree with you. I think timber is a fantastic material. It's a shame that my legislation is putting a lot of blocks on that. I think there needs to be a lot more testing in terms of CLT, in terms of combustibility, to kind of reassure the market, reassure consumers, and reassure insurers. So that's a big hurdle we need to overcome. There are assessment criteria that can, be targeted to reduce and be lean and sufficient as we can in interim periods, and particularly targeting the easy wins, so under 80 metres buildings under 80 fall into the combustibility category. We can kind of push for better materials in those areas. But I would say the key thing to do in the short term is to reduce and be lean and engage our structural engineers as much as possible.
Thank you. And then just a quick observation from me, which has nothing to do with concrete or timber, but the hydrogen question. Unfortunately, too many people, when you say hydrogen, think of explosions. But actually, hydrogen as a gas in a domestic or commercial and non-domestic setting is probably safer than natural gas because it dissipates. But we need to educate people as to what we're dealing with, so that they don't jump to what might be the obvious and immediate, but not quite the strictly accurate observation about whether it's a structural material, a fuel, or something else.
Okay, so is this addressing all the points?
As many as you want to. All ministers are allowed to address all the questions or no questions. Or make questions one to their own.
The gentleman from Hackney spoke about the tallest timber buildings in the world and coming to have a look at those. At some stage I will, obviously in Parliament. I'm not very far from you. I'm responding from our side to the building safety bill at the moment. The answer in terms of the nervousness about tall buildings built using timber, It goes back to 4.5 years ago and actually beyond that, where 72 people, of course, lost their lives. What I would say is that actually our approach, the front bench, is to set up actually a works agency and actually do a proper assessment of risk, block by block, building by building, as has been done in Victoria, in Australia, for example. It's crazy, isn't it, 4.5 years on that hasn't actually been done. So happily we'll engage with you that way. And then, of course, those buildings should be funded up front, fixed, and there should be recovery with the polluter pays principle. And that's the broad industry responsible for that toxic mess in terms of building safety in the future. I think our response collectively needs to be smarter. I think that's the point you're making, and I will be on this. I'll have more of a conversation. Planning, yes, legislation needs to be strengthened. Exactly right. Building safety bill, again, the building safety regulator, which we set up as part of the health and safety executive, is great going forward in terms of changing the landscape, building safety. We've argued from the opposition that their terms of reference also needs to include the march towards carbon zero, because actually, flooding and climate change are real safety issues for buildings. That proposal, that amendment, has been rejected by the government. So we'll continue pushing. It's a really good point. Skills, I think I mentioned it in my own, 100% agree. That was part of the problem in terms of the government initiative scrapped. The supply chain, the skill base isn't there. And as a former careers advisor, I'd love to champion the cause of the construction industry and modern construction techniques, and people getting there, getting opportunities and money in their pockets.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Right.
Thank you very much. Claire, can I just say thank you for raising the issue about skills, because it is a major problem in the building industry. It started before the pandemic. There's a serious shortage of all the trades: bricklayers, carpenters, plasterers. And one of the problems is the image, as you Claire, you mentioned this. For too long, an apprenticeship or using your hands has seemed to be inferior compared to going to university. And previous governments are all to blame for that. We need parity of esteem about using your hands and doing an apprenticeship. But those apprenticeships need to be high quality apprenticeships. We're hearing quite a lot about boot camps, and we're hearing about flexible apprenticeships. Those are not the real solutions to actually tackling the skills crisis in the building industry. We've got to change the image of our industry, and we've got a part to play in that. But it doesn't help when everyone can call themselves a builder. It's the last bit that's completely unregulated. Anyone can be a genuine builder this afternoon and go out and advertise. That can't be right, and it's actually damaging the reputation of our industry. It damages confidence for consumers and householders having work done, and actually for any government, you're looking at lost revenue because cash in hand is rife, unfortunately. So skills need to be addressed. There was a question from Rob about the volume house builders. One of the things I'd like to see any future government do is diversify the housing market. The volume house builders dominate the supply of new housing in this country. So you get the identikit housing that you see all across our country. We want local builders to increase their percentage down to 12%. There won't be local house builders that carry on like that, because, as I said earlier, 40% of new homes were built by local house builders. You've got to say to local house builders, you want quality and you want diversity in the housing market. And then the last bit about timber. Master builders have been building with timber for hundreds of years, so it's not a material that we're alien to, and I'd very much like to go on a site visit. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Vincent. Leonie.
Well, briefly, because I think we've had a lot of answers. I saw Twitter has or something going up. Just really on the, actually, I think there might be a slightly taller building construction through CRT there and from Castle, so it's slightly taller than the ones that you just mentioned, Vince. But it does make your point for you, which I have visited, and it was actually a bit like visiting some sort of enormous sauna, because it was half. It was really, really.
Sauna from the material, not the temperature. Just to
Yes,
check.
exactly, just the wood, not because it was volume involved. Just to come to the point about planning, look, in London, you could argue that we're in a slightly better position because the London plan sits between the local planning policy framework, so the 32 boroughs in the city have to be in compliance with the London plan, which then sits in between those local plans and then the national planning policy framework. However, the London plan is supposed to be in compliance with the national planning policy framework. As far as I know, and the Mayor doesn't have the right to do call-in on everything. It says that only certain categories, more than 150 units, more than 30 metres high, there's a list of other things as well. But he does have the right to call in if a scheme doesn't comply with the London plan, and there's somebody locally. For example, Wandsworth Council, where I'm based, on London Conservatives, and they've got a very low level of affordable housing or something like this. And so he has called in various different boroughs and has imposed things, and is also imposing quite high levels of renewables and bicycle storage and things like this. And I have not yet heard that anybody has appealed above the London plan to the planning inspectorate on the grounds of any of these sustainability items that have been included in the London plan. Now, Mike Ainsworth's colleague Ruth Cadbury, who's now taking up the planning brief for Labour, I'm really hoping that we can start to see this moving forward now that we've got Google coming to place generating. They've got to start looking at this. Otherwise, they're going to be a laughing stock when they get to COP26. Well, maybe they just will be a laughing stock when they get to COP26, but we can't really help them on that. But it would be really good to see this moving forward. So I should be annoying Mike and Ruth as much as you are on trying to get something done about changing the national planning policy frameworks and being much more positive about all the areas that we need to address.
Thank you, Leonie. On the next round, we'll start with you, so you can get your expertise in first. That's only fair. I thought, yes, there's three gentlemen here who've got their hand up, and there's one lady there. Given the mic is coming from over here, can we start with that lady here, and then it's there.
I've got the mic, that's all. Good afternoon, guys. My name's Steph Wright, and I am your local house builder. So I've got a house building company called Gusto Homes. We've been building low energy houses, believe it or not, for over 20 years. We build not just low energy houses, but we build low energy communities. So one thing I'd ask you all to look at is the planning, the local plan document that's been put together by the Lincolnshire City Council and a group of Lincolnshire authorities, because what they've been able to do there, because we've been building these low energy communities for a good period of time, they've been able to get a lot of data from what we've done, and they've been able to feed that back into their planning policy document. So it's worth having a look at what they've put together there. It's in draft form at the moment, but that should get over the line hopefully in the next few months. Just a quick comment on timber, very quickly. We were building I-beam houses, timber I-beam houses 20 years ago with cellulose fibre insulation. That has to be the way forward. We need to have a low energy way of building houses. We can't capture too much, use too much CO2 in terms of the way we're building over the next few years. And the final comment is, in order to get these exemplar developments going, councils do need to be very accommodating on Section 106 costs. It costs more to build to this high standard at the moment. Legislation needs to come in and change all that, so we'll developers, and our industry is it's just about making money out of the land, not about building good quality to small developers during this next period to try to get those exemplar developments up and running.
Thank you. I think you sneaked us. I'll come back to you two gentlemen in a second if this lady here would like to ask. Can I just say, anybody who's got an exemplar project, we've heard of at least two. Tracy, our good colleague here, organiser for SERA, one of the two. Could you give your details to her, and we will find a way of sharing that on the SERA website. Thank you very much. Your name,
Thank you. I'm Rachel Burgess. I'm a councillor in Wokingham. Just had a quick question for Zoe. You mentioned in your presentation a clear sort of prioritisation of on-site generation as opposed to off-site. And I'd just be interested to know a bit more about the reasons for that. Obviously, you've got the affordability element for the household, but what are the other reasons? For context, in Wokingham, the local Tories who run the council, they've recently, to great fanfare, announced a solar farm. So I'm just wondering if they should actually be focusing a lot more on on-site generation as in terms of a household, rather than big sort of flashy off-site generation projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So,
Dermot McKibben, I'm from Tory Beckham. I hope to be a
can
Labour
I just say currently?
I also write about leasehold reform with a housing blog, getcommonholdone.com. My view is I think we need to consider the just transition in terms of reforming leasehold law. In the north of England, there's a tradition of building leasehold houses. People have to pay volume builders for permission to put up conservatories. These volume builders are also going to charge you if you want to install a heat pump in your property. We also have loads of problems with flats in London that are unsafe, and the building safety bill is going to condemn leaseholders to pay enormous charges. If you have the right to manage in a block of flats, you take over the management of your property. And I think in those circumstances, it's a good idea to allow the flat residents to take charge of how they're going to make their block more green friendly. And the final thing is, what are we going to do about all those blocks in the capital and elsewhere which are unsafe and facing enormous bills?
Thank you. And the gentleman just behind you, last question, and then Leonie, as many or as few as you'd like. So.
Hi, I'm Councillor Paul White from the soon-to-be People's Republic of Wandsworth. No one should be laughing at that. So a couple of things to that side of the panel, unfortunately. Robert, there's one thing I was questioned last week about smart meters and heat pumps don't work too well together. It's probably an urban myth, I don't know, but it completely flummoxed me because I hadn't heard it before. And Zoe, I was really pleased to see your full life cycle impact reports, because I think that is really important. It's really important to overcoming planning issues as well, because sometimes the demolition, the released carbon from demolition, the use of concrete, which has been covered, and also some of the questionable things that we're using, is supposed to be, insulation, for instance. Some of the spray insulation is toxic. We're using that. So a full life cycle could actually lead to a lot of reuse rather than demolition.
Thank you very much, Paul. Leonie, by all means, take as many as you like. I would also say, if we trot through these, we might get in the last minute for anybody.
Sure. I'm going to roll up. Dermot knows that I agree with getting common house done, because I actually use that expression in sitting in the middle of a farming facility or a housing facility. But it's absolutely crucial. If people want to make improvements to their house to help with the climate emergency, what on earth is going on? Either to a flat or a house, and then you've got the owner of the freehold saying, well, I'm going to charge you £10,000 because it's going to improve it, but someone's actually trying to spend £10,000 on making the improvements. So that is obviously completely wrong. We need control, we need it yesterday. So that's my answer on that one. I'm not going to answer all the smart meters and the heat pumps and full life cycle costings, apart from in my answer to Seth and the whole thing about the way in which we, local authorities are in a terrible place around trying to increase the amount of social housing. When you look at people who are in overcrowded accommodation and are desperate for a transfer, and probably there's terrible condensation because there's too many people living in a small space, and it might have thermal bridging problems and it's cold and all the rest of it. It's not just about improving the building. You might have overcrowding. So because of the way the grant system was smashed up by the Tories when they came in 2010, the only way that you can increase the amount of social housing is by doing the generation. When I was working in social housing, meant in many cases that you would be retrofitting estates and improving what was there. Regeneration now has become a dirty word. And to me, redevelopment was knock it down and start again. The regeneration has become merged with redevelopment.
And it's a nonsense because of all the issues that we've just been talking about, that's where the lifestyle costing comes in. We are only demolishing because local authorities have got a finite resource of land, and then they're desperate to find any amount of social housing that they can put on it. But then, of course, they need to have a builder that they work with who's then going to probably put up 800 units and stuff that needs to be sold to fund the 20 social housing units, which is what Wandsworth would like to get away with. So we really need to reform and actually have a grant system that supports us, not just around really affordable homes, but actually meeting housing needs. And this is an absolute, it's not just a just transition, we need an environmental transition, but we really need to be helping people in this situation. And that's why I have some problem with your idea about being flexible over Section 106, because then you're saying, okay, well, Wandsworth, we just had the Northern Line exception, 2 stops on the Northern Line. Now, a lot of that came from a government-backed loan to CFL. But the bit that Wandsworth put in was £267 million worth of Section 106, which could have created a lot of local housing. But because the council wanted to be able to say, look, the first new tube station in London for 80 years, they shoveled 267 million quid into a hole in the ground. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm very keen on public transport. It's in my constituency, I love it. But I am really angry that there are local people who are missing out on housing. And that's the problem about flexibility of Section 106. So, no flexibility on Section 106 or SERA. But what we want is grants that helps us create the properties of the future that we need and meets housing needs. Yeah.
Okay. I think, unfortunately, Leonie, you do slip in a 3-word phrase. Get Commonwealth done. Yes, the right ones are the right ones. Brian.
Really interested to hear about what you're doing. If you're not already a member of the Federation, please contact me. And you raised the point about Section 106 about cost. This is a problem for small builders about Section 106 and the seal, because it cannot just stop some development from taking place. I'm just concerned about the disproportionate effect it has on small builders. So that's probably for a further discussion. There was the issue about East End reform, and I think that's an ongoing issue. It just reflects me about the need for more diversity in the housing market, and obviously in terms of looking at the East End reform problems, common home, which you mentioned, slightly outside my remit, but I can recognise the problem. And to me, actually, we've got more players in the housing market who might have fewer of those problems. And then the issue about Paul raised about smart meters, heat pumps. Look, I think consumers need to know more about the impact, what can be done with heat pumps and hydrogen, all of it, a bit of a mystery, slightly bit of a mystery to me. And how will it work with existing buildings? What can you do? That's where I think the education needs to come in as well. And let's not forget the fabric, because you can have an efficient heating system, but if it's leaky, you're losing all the benefits. So fabric and heating, that's the combination.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Frank?
Yes, it's a local eco-builder, yes, a community builder. Section 106, well, if Michael Gove continues with one aspect of the reforms put forward by Jenrick, Section 106 goes to go, disappears, and replace it with a national levy. We do away the details of that. We proposed a use it or lose it bill, which is a ruling which I was helped to write, one of our member presented. And that's about opening up opportunities as well for small builders such as yourself, and the Federation of Master Builders as well, which is obviously advocating for that. Dermot, leasehold reform, yes, 100% agree. John Healy, Sarah Jones, the previous team, and I wrote a document not very long ago about that. That's live. The legislation is due to come anytime now to Parliament over leasehold and ground rent reform. We've set up a common home council, which you're probably familiar with. So the government incredibly slowly being dragged kicking and screaming by people like you and very probably National Leaseholder Campaign are going in the right direction, but we'll hold their feet to the fire. Commonwealth is the way, 100% agree. I'll sit there. People's Republic of one. Yes.
Not until the next May.
Yes.
That was a request to come canvassing.
Yes. I'll have to do that.
It's a request.
Smart meters. Look, again, I was asking Mike a similar question before, actually. I don't know what the interplay will be with the likes of hydrogen boilers. So there's an initiative going on in my constituency around that, the installation of smart meters. And I have a vested interest to have a smart meter. Vested interest. If we were investing in it, we'd have to be ripping out 24 million smart meters that don't work with technology. I don't know. So looking to you for the answers.
Well, in a sense, this side of the table are, in different ways, people who are engaged in how will it work on the ground and in the building. So we've probably all got contributions to that. So I'll come to you first in a second. I think the one thing I would venture, and I'm not sure who used the phrase, but Brian, it's a mystery. I think that was a Toya Wilcox song. To tell you how old I am. But if you think about technology, this is a mystery to somebody who was born 60 years ago, except for those people who've since learned it. Every third generation, things come along that for the first generation, it's like, what? How? My grandparents grew up in houses fueled by coal, Rayburns and Parkways and open fires. My parents grew up in homes, once they moved out of those homes, that were fueled by gas boilers. The next generation will grow up in homes that are heat pumps, that work in a different way. We are all perfectly competent at learning new things. And it's amazing, I find it amazing regularly, that some people clearly doing this because they've got an agenda, other people, perhaps they don't appreciate how capable most people are, given a bit of support, a bit of engagement, doubts about how these things work, provided people like my colleagues and your respective colleagues have done some of the work to show how they will work. So it's not all experimental, because these things are no longer experimental. But Zoe, do you want to say something about the question that was put to you, which is about on-site?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for the question. I think it's quite simple an answer. We're in a small country with a limited land space, and we don't want to fill our fields with PV panels. Roofs on buildings provide a perfect opportunity to generate renewable energy at source. So you're kind of supply and demand sort of linked right at source. So that would be my main answer. I also want to come back on the life cycles and just say the only way we're going to get there is to actually regulate what the carbon impact is of the buildings. At the minute it's complete, we don't even quantify it. Only major developments in London have asked to give a kind of assessment on what that might be. We need that to be upscaled across the sector, and everyone needs to be calculating what building materials to use in terms of carbon. We have a fixed carbon budget and over that.
We come to hydrogen. So let me take the hydrogen one to you. So I think, so first thing I'd say, there are second generation hydrogen capable smart meters that exist, so they can easily be installed. My broader point would probably be, I will be amazed if this hydrogen is used at scale in this country, because it is absolutely the least efficient way of doing things, because it doesn't stack up. And to synthesize hydrogen from renewables would be far better in that example. So I suspect that will be an issue for smart meters, but if there will be a second generation smart meter available. We'll have to do that. When it comes to heat pumps, the difficulty I always have with answering questions like this specifically is with the tens of millions of homes that hopefully we've got are all different. I have no idea exactly what type of situation there is. However, I've heard this kind of thing with solar panels. I was told, and we got calls once saying, smart just don't like solar panels. They do like solar panels, and I can solar panels like smart. So I can prove that one. And what it was in the early days of the rollout, and one of the installers didn't have the qualification to work height, so they couldn't go up into the loft to check the solar panels before decommissioning the house, before installing smart meters. So there will absolutely be people out there that will we will be getting smart meters and heat pumps, and there will be some work. I'm certain of that. However, systemically, the whole point of smart meters is to work with technology like smart meters, heat pumps, because what we can do with heat pumps is essentially they work with fridge reverse, and like fridge doesn't have to be running the whole time. Is if you can heat the home over the course of a day, but then in that peak period between say 5 and 7 PM, it can go off, so you're not spending the most expensive electricity in your heat pump, and your home is still warm. That's the kind of thing you can do. And indeed, we're about to enter a period, sadly, where our homes are going to get very hot, and heat pumps can hopefully start acting as cooling devices for our homes. We're going to be using that very dynamically in the future. So smart meters have to work with heat pumps. I'm very confident on the system level that they will. I'm suspecting that my colleagues will get letters and correspondence from people with issues over the course of the next few years where something has not quite worked as it should. But that's the beauty of our housing stock. My stat was always half of our housing stock was built before World War II. I've now got a third was built before 1919. Add to that. That basically means everything we're going to do is going to be incredibly difficult. We've got a tough ask because of the diversity of housing we've got. But I'm pretty confident on heat pump on all the time. I'm pretty confident that if in 15 years' time we've got hydroelectric scale for domestic heating, I'll swim in on top of the right coast to try and prove my big wrong. I'll be amazed.
Thank you very much, Rob. I'm going to draw it to close now because we're pretty well over time. And if you haven't been to other SERA events, you will know this room gets full for every event because people are understanding that net zero means me, it means my family, it means who I work for, it means public services around me. So if you haven't thought about joining SERA, do think about that. If you won't join, you can at least access some of the resources we've got. And as I said, we will gather together the exemplar projects that are in the room, working with our Labour Housing Group colleagues. This particular report is available now over here for those people who might want that. I guess I didn't get to ask you why you don't have smart meters yet. They didn't turn all theirs. Right, so at least you were willing, Anna, thank you. But, you know, there's a journey that we're going on, and part of that journey is that your home will become something in addition to all the other things you think it is, which is an energy asset. It will be a home energy asset because it might have an EV plugged into it, because it's got a heat pump, because it's got storage capability, and that could be both electrical or thermal. All of these things will start to change the nature of the thing you live in. If you're buying a new build, hopefully the thing you get sold. We're all perfectly capable of understanding how that will work. There are plenty of people, in a sense, behind all of us who are doing the working out. So it's a question of how we can support that and encourage that. And I think I'd end with one last note, because I haven't mentioned it before, but I think it is pretty important. I'm on the board of something called UK 100. It's a network of local government that are committed from their leadership down to being net zero before 2050, and many of them before 2040. Because some of us have to go first and help work these things out. You might want to do that yourself because you can, but not all of you will. But you can certainly support your local authority. Some of them, it will be supporting them because they're already getting it, they just need more help and a local voice. Some of them, it might be because they haven't yet got it, but it's inconceivable that every location won't have to do some of those things. But if your place gets left to last, it might prove to be difficult and expensive. So support your local authority and your councillors. Have a very good rest of the conference, and thank you for being here. Thank you.